As a young man who always wanted to get into sportscasting, always wanted to debate sports for a living, I've always elaborated my sports content career, all dwelling from one place, fanhood or fandom. Throughout my years of being a sports fan, I've rooted for, without being a fan of a plethora of teams. Most of my viewers, most of my compadres know me as being a diehard Giants fan. But football was not my first love when it came to sports. It was basketball. And while I've always been, a true fan of the sport, I love the history. I love looking at, the dynamics of some historic great teams. It really wasn't until I was in the eighth grade, seventh or eighth grade in junior high, where I really started to delve into what it was like being a sports fan. And so, like I said, basketball was my first love, but I really didn't have like a true team to root for. And so, throughout my, you know, days and years of junior high, you know, being a diehard Kobe fan, you would have thought that I would have been a diehard Lakers fan. I was not. Most of my peers throughout junior high were diehard, not Cleveland Cavalier fans, were LeBron fans. And so, because throughout my youth in junior high, I've had spirited debates over and over again amongst my peers about why Kobe is ahead of LeBron as far as being the best player in basketball. And in doing so, I kind of took a knack in rooting for the Celtics because the Celtics always beat LeBron on a routinely basis, especially when it came to the playoffs. But then as I look back into NBA history and kind of my style in terms of how do I cover the game, how I play the game, and how I debate the game, it was really pretty much in tune with Boston Celtics lore. Let me explain on that. So, when I first got into NBA history, the first legend that I identified with was Larry Bird. Because, similar to myself, Bird was not the most physically gifted. He was not the most athletic. Um, a bit of my trash talking style is very Bird-esque in just how combative and how big of an ego that I have. My favorite legend in looking back at 80s and 90s basketball was Bird. Big respects to guys like Magic, Wilt, um, obviously Jordan, Hakeem, list goes on and on. Bird was my guy because I just loved his game from an aesthetic style. Um, Not the most physically gifted, but he knew how to beat his opponents through angles, through shot making, one of the best playmaking forwards of all time. The trash talk, all of it. Larry Legend, that was my guy. Bill Russell, another guy who I idolized. And in terms of play style, especially once I starting to get in the habit of basketball, I was always more of a defensive minded, floor general type. I love playmaking. I love playing defense. Um, Rebounding, I had a real knack for it. Not because I was some athlete as well, but because I just knew how to track the ball and how to time where the ball was going to be. Very Rajon Rondo-esque. And as far as being an undersized big when I played a little bit in junior high, just the way that I could get a crowd going and get, an enthusiastic reaction without even, scoring or come up with a big block or anything like that. I'm like, okay, defensively, defense still withstanding, my play style in terms of an energetic play style was very Kevin Garnett-esque. And so you ask, how does a New Jersey kid who is a diehard Giants fan end up becoming a Celtics fan? Well, I'm going to get into that. In the first episode of the Relapse CJ Talk Sports Show, I'm going to give you how I became a Celtics fan. Like I said, because the Celtics always beat LeBron on a regular basis, because I thoroughly enjoy, watching those epic battles of the Celtics and Cavaliers, in the mid to late 2000s. I was mainly a Celtics fan because I was a diehard LeBron James hater. Now, of course, over time, I end up growing a huge appreciation of LeBron's game and his legacy. And so, once that phase of my life pretty much transpired, I started rooting for the Celtics for another reason. Now, don't get me wrong. I know how ridiculous and insane and just downright cruel Celtics fans could be. In no way, shape, or form am I ever gonna defend the level of atrocity that fan base could cause to one another. And so, I am in no way, shape, or form identifying myself with other Boston Celtics fans. But, like I said, being a New Jersey kid, being, I guess, some more level-headed Celtics fan, I kind of see the argument on both sides of the coin. And it really kind of all started when I really started rooting for the Celtics during the Brad Stevens era. Brad Stevens was an underrated, a really good head coach when he was in college basketball. Getting his Butler team, I believe, to a couple of Final Fours throughout his collegiate coaching career, and really didn't have that much talent. And so, when the Celtics did eventually blow up that Big Three era of basketball of KG, Pierce, Ray Allen left in Miami previously, but then which, of course, Rondo became a star. By the end of, I want to say, the 2013 season, it was time for Boston to blow it all up because they had gotten as far as that Big Three was capable of doing. Yes, in the end, I look at that Big Three, sometimes Big Four era as a failure, but really, that core was really only built to succeed for... They were only supposed to be a title contender for, at best, 3 or 4 years. Now, I think they end up lasting, I want to say 6 years, maybe 7. What was that? KG got there in 2007. They won in 08. LeBron won his first title in 2012. Ray Allen then got there a year later in 2013. So yeah, so that Big Three was together for about 6 years. They won the title in 2008. KG got hurt when the Lakers won when Kobe won his first title without Shaq. They went back, and then they went back in 2009. So yeah, they got together in 2007. They won their title. They won their first title in 2008. KG was hurt in 2009. They lost to Kobe and the Lakers in 2010. So, they made the conference finals 3 times. Yeah, they made the conference finals 3 times. They made the NBA finals twice. But they only came away with 1 title. And even though I was a big fan of what that core had as much as I was a big fan in terms of how that core impacted the trajectory of NBA history, this is where I am probably going to upset a lot of Celtics fans, diehard Celtics fans. I've always thought that core was kind of overrated, not in terms of what they were able to do, but in terms of how braggadocious they were about it. Had they just won that one title, sustained as contenders, but really was kind of humble and nonchalant about it, I probably will look at that era of basketball more fondly. But because of how egotistical that core ended up being, especially Paul Pierce, still my guy though, still one of my 10 favorite players in NBA history. But had they had been more humble and less egotistic as far as winning that one title, I probably will look at that era more fondly. But again, I can never knock at how that team won a title because, again, I'm very much a defensive-minded kind of personality. And so that team I love so much because that might have been the best defensive team I have seen over my course in being an NBA fan. But now, like I said, let me get into the Brad Stevens era. Brad Stevens was pretty much an underdog coach in college. And he was coming on to being the Celtics' new head coach, filled with plucky underdogs and overachievers. Guys like Jay Crowder, 5'8" Isaiah Thomas, Avery Bradley, like, fucking, excuse my language, Amir Johnson. Like, this team was not constructed to be like some contender even in the East. And so they rebuilt it. They kept Rondo around for 1 year before they uploaded him to Dallas. I don't remember the package entirely, but I think they got back a couple of firsts. I know we got back Marcus. I believe we bought... No, Jay Crowder came off. Jay Crowder we got from the trade package. And I think we ended up with a pick that eventually turned into Marcus Smart. I'm going to look more into it after this video. But like I said, that core of the Celtics team was not like... That core was not meant to, prove to be any sort of contender. And they were bad for a year. Before, of course, eventually they blew it up. Got back a haul from Brooklyn, and I'm sure you guys know the rest of the story. They end up swapping picks. That first pick ended up being Jaylen Brown, who went 3rd overall, and the following year they draft Jason Tatum. Now, throughout this biography of me being the Celtics fan, I'm going to touch a little bit as far as some of the criticisms of the Celtics tenure over, let's just say, the last decade. Like I said, they eventually blew it up. I love Jason Tatum coming out of college. Jaylen Brown was not super high on just because of how, not just young, but just how, yes, I get he was an uber athlete, but incredibly raw. Needed time to develop. Just his overall skill set. It just reminded me of a lot of bad basketball in terms of guys who are that caliber of an athlete, could score a bunch of points, decent defender, but doesn't really have a large impact on winning. And even though the Celtics did, I believe, Brad Stevens' 3rd year, they get to the conference finals. Again, the core of that team was Isaiah Thomas, Avery Bradley, Jay Crowder, Marcus Smart, Al Horford, and Jaylen Brown, who was playing who was averaging, I think, 8 points a game coming off the bench, or playing 8 minutes. I know 8 was the magic number, but I know he was barely a role player for that Celtics team. Year later, of course, They trade for Kyrie Irving, a move that I heavily applaud because, listen, as much as I loved Isaiah Thomas, and I love the foundation that Brad Stevens had built, I looked at Isaiah Thomas, God love him, I looked at him more as a system player who whose credit was heavily dependent on the structure of that Celtics team, where it was very Allen Iverson 2001. Just an undersized guard, score first guard, surround him with a bunch of 3-and-D wings, a bunch of grindy defenders, and you have a brilliant offensive-minded head coach who knew how to embrace his strengths and hide his weaknesses. And under those circumstances, Isaiah Thomas grew to be an MVP caliber player. Did I think he was a legit MVP caliber player? No, I just think he had a wondrous year where, unfortunately, things didn't necessarily break his way because midway through the playoffs, he tragically lost his sister to a horrible accident. And he just used the whole spirit of that team, plus the TD Garden, plus Brad Stevens' system, to really play above and beyond and prove himself to be a max salary type of player. But my fear is like, okay, we're relying, if you pay him this much, if you pay him a supermax, you're relying on a 5'9", at best 220-pound guard to being potentially the face of the franchise and lead you to a championship. I'm sorry, but there is a reason why there's only been two small guards in NBA history to lead you to a title. And as much as I love Isaiah, I did not think that he was at that level or could get to that level. And so I advocated that they trade for Kyrie Irving. Now, ultimately, that experiment did not work. The circumstances were there for it to potentially work. Kyrie wanted out. He wanted to prove that he could lead his own team. And so he gets traded to Boston. Wasn't on his list, but damn it, that's still a great environment to be in. You got a great head coach. You got a plethora of good role players. And you got two dynamic wings in Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. Plus, we added Gordon Hayward. And so, I looked at that Celtics core, went from being the severely overachieving cast of misfits to then, okay, they're making the right moves, they're making the right trades to try to be a title contender. And so, they were very easy to root for at that point because they weren't like, training a bunch of picks for a win now move. No, they were obviously trying to win now, but they were also trying to, build long-term success, have long-term success with Kyrie, these role players, and some dynamic young wings. Plus, again, we added Gordon Hayward in free agency. And plus, Kyrie was one of my favorite players at that point. So, I really loved how the Celtics became a championship contending team without throwing a bunch of money at high-priced superstars. No, they went for star caliber players plus fit. But I'm not gonna lie, I was a tad bit frustrated because it's almost like they weren't expecting Tatum and Brown to be this, to be the players that they are now. And so, at a point, at least in terms of that era, it felt like the Celtics, like they were holding all their chips, they were holding all the cards, but they were afraid to make a move. Like, okay, who's going to be the centerpiece of this franchise moving forward? Is it Kyrie? Is it Jaylen Brown? Is it Tatum? Whoever it is, you need to make the right trades. You need to sign the right free agency now while you have this core developing. Unfortunately for Gordon Hayward, he was just at the wrong place at the wrong time, literally and figuratively. Unfortunately, breaks his leg or breaks his ankle 2 minutes within the game of his debut as a Celtic. Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum eventually fulfilled their promise, but we really didn't get signs of it up until the playoffs of that year, where Kyrie was out. Like I said, you're being led by two young players, two young wings, and a cast of role players. So yeah, was Jason Tatum, did Jason Tatum inherit a really good environment? Absolutely. But I'm not gonna act like he inherited the like the Golden State Warriors or Shaq in his prime or it. And this is where I'm going to get into some of the criticisms of the Tatum and Brown era. If Jason Tatum was drafted by a team that already had an established superstar and still hadn't won, then yes, I think the criticisms would be much more valid. But again, Jason Tatum didn't become the guy up until the pandemic year or the year before. No, yes, the pandemic year, the 2019-2020 season. And so, the Celtics hadn't started building around them until Brad Stevens moved upstairs. So acting like, Jason Tatum has been on these well-established super teams is just not true. Like I said, early on through Brad Stevens' tenure, those teams were basically just a bunch of overachievers. You're really going to discredit the Celtics for losing to LeBron with their best player being 5'0" Isaiah Thomas. I'm not falling for that. And then we get to Tatum and Brown's rookie year. Most of our high volume scorers were on previous teams. Was on a different team at the previous year. Like I said, Gordon Hayward missed the whole year. Kyrie was a new acquisition. I think Marcus Morris was a new acquisition. The only guys that has stayed on the team were Al Horford and Marcus Smart. I'm sorry, if an early 30-year-old Al Horford is your second or third best player on a deep playoff team, I don't think that should quantify as a super team by any means. And so, again, the stigma around the Tatum and Brown era, I just feel like is, again, in my opinion, just ridicule, and the fact that we don't usually see young stars win this much without having a title, where historically speaking, most young superstars that win their championship early generally already have like an established made all-star alongside them. Talk about the late great Kobe Bean Bryant, who is, by the way, my all-time favorite player. Kobe Bryant had 8 years of prime Shaq. And to not Kobe's fault, again, he was a puppy at this point, but ask yourself this: would Kobe have the legacy he has if he didn't get those prime years with Shaq early in his career? Probably not. We talk about Magic, who I believe is to be the third greatest player in NBA history. But yeah, while he was fantastic as a rookie with the Lakers, he had Kareem, who was still arguably the best player in the league. And even though he wasn't a superstar at this point of his career, Tim Duncan did have David Robinson, who was still a bona fide all-star. So it wasn't like Tatum had came into the league with a bona fide superstar already on the team. No, he had a good roster, but by the end of his rookie year, you can make a strong argument he was the Celtics' best player, not Kyrie. And then, I just feel as though because the history of Boston, the dynastic Patriots dynasty, the Red Sox, having the success that they've had throughout the 2000s. Excuse me. And again, I am no way, shape, or form defending Celtics fans at all, because I know how ludicrous and outrageous they could be. However, I feel as though compared to those other teams, the Celtics have more of an underdog feel because, I don't know, maybe it's because we hold them to such prestige that when they fail, when they don't win a title, it's looked at as a failure. But I just feel as though there needs to be context along with it. Again, I don't want to delve into what the Celtics were in the 90s and early 2000s just because I was not a fan of sports at that time. I'll probably look into it later throughout the all season. But in the mid to early 2000s, in the mid to late 2000s, the Celtics were a pretty consistent contender. Like I said, 2008 they won the title. 2009 KG got hurt. 2010 they lost to Kobe, and by that point LeBron had formed a super team in Miami, and so again that core was really only built to succeed. Their window was really only about 3 at best 4 years. Had they just won that one title, but wasn't as braggadocious as they had been, I think we probably looked at this team the same way we looked at the Pistons of the early 2000s, where they were in the conference finals almost every year. They had made a couple of NBA championship appearances, but they only got one title out of it. And again, age and injuries was really the main factor as to why that core underperformed, talking about the Celtics. But as far as this core had drafted well, at least early in their process. They made the right trades, I thought, at least at the time. And now, they're in prime position of winning the title. And listen, I'm going to break down, as a matter of fact, let's get into this now. I'm going to break down each of the Celtics runs as far as making the conference finals and all that. Like I said, I want to say by Brad Stevens' third year, they had made the conference finals with the Isaiah Thomas team. That team got beaten in 5 games. Again, their best player was 5'9" Isaiah Thomas. Marcus Smart, high-level role player. I think Marcus Morris, Al Horford, and Avery Bradley. Good team, but you're not beating LeBron and Kyrie. Then we get into the Tatum and Brown year. Kyrie is out. Gordon Hayward was out the whole year. That team was led by Al Horford, Terry Rozier, sophomore year Jaylen Brown, and rookie year Jason Tatum. That team outplayed a dynamic duo in Embiid and Ben Simmons when he was still a high-level all-star tier, maybe an all-NBA caliber performer, and Joel Embiid, who was at that point just entering the beginning stages of his, hopefully not an early prime of his career. Then we get to the Eastern Conference Finals, we faced off against LeBron, and the moment and the stage was just too big. Applaud them for pushing LeBron to 7, pushing that veteran Cavs team with 7, but no one in their right minds thought that, oh yeah, this Celtics team, they're going to make a run. They're going to get to the Eastern Conference Finals and potentially win it. I don't think even the biggest diehard Celtics fan was going into the playoffs with that mindset. We were all just happy just to be there and was happy to see what Tatum and Brown could do. Once we saw what they were capable of doing, we're like, okay, this is going to be the duo. This is going to be the duo moving forward. And unfortunately, the Celtics just didn't build around them properly because they tried to make them supporting pieces of established stars like Kyrie and Gordon Hayward, where in reality, the future is within that duo in Tatum and Brown. And so they underperformed. They didn't take the lead that I thought that they were going to take their second year together. And the team was just a massive disappointment. Kyrie, love him now. But I don't think he was quite ready to be the leader and the face of that franchise. Give him credit for trying, but it takes more than just being a great talent. It takes a certain level of maturity. It takes a certain level of timing. And while I do think had Tatum and Brown had been this, Kyrie would have been a match made in heaven. Again, much like Gordon Hayward, just wrong timing, bad timing just really ultimately set that core up for failure. And so he goes to Brooklyn. He takes shots at Celtics fans. Don't blame him. But dude, my feelings was just take accountability. Take accountability and just admit that you weren't built to be the face of a franchise. Not everyone could be Batman. Not everyone could be the best player on a championship team. Some, even great players, are more suited to be a high-end second option. Kobe started his career being just that. Once he had Kobe not ultimately became the player that had Kobe not become the icon that he ultimately became, we'd be looking at him at a different light. Same with Kyrie. And so I want to take this time now to give Kyrie massive credit on the player that he is now in Dallas, where he is clearly the more mature, level-headed veteran alongside Luka. But he knows that this is Luka's team. He knows that Luka is the guy. And I'm not just talking about, Luka was drafted there. Like, no, Luka is arguably the best player in the league. And Kyrie accepts that. Dynamic. Not all dynamic duos are created equal. Not every dynamic duo is going to have a Batman and Superman type of relationship. Most dynamic duos end up having to be a Batman and Robin situation. Michael and Scotty were Batman and Robin. Kobe, early in his career, in that first championship, it was Batman and Robin. LeBron and Kyrie, it was Batman and Robin. Again, now, the second and third title with Shaq and Kobe, I will argue it was Batman and Superman. Literally. Kareem and Magic, I would say that was more Batman and Superman in terms of their duo. And with Luka and Kyrie, it may feel like, and with Luka and Kyrie from a talent standpoint, it may feel like it's Batman and Superman. But in terms of impact, I would say it's more, to continue with the comic book comparisons, I'm going to say it's more Batman and Nightwing as a duo. Where Batman is still the guy, but Nightwing has a similar stratosphere in terms of tier when it comes to their partnership. And so, I'm getting a little bit off topic here. With this one, with the Celtics tandem, and again, how I became a fan, it really came into the fact that I love the history. Bird, KG, Rondo, those are 3 of my 20 favorite players in NBA history. I love the underdog feel to the team once I really became a fan. And just ultimately, I just feel as though because of my high level respect for them, it's really kind of hard for me to root against them unless, they're competing against the Knicks, which, if you guys have followed me for a long time, you guys would know while I'm not as big as a Knicks fan as I am a Giants fan, but following with that same underdog feel to it, I can't help but root for the Knicks. Like they're too much of like what's a good underdog tale? They're much like the Roonies. They're much like the Little Giants, no pun intended. They're very much like Rocky. No matter how many times they continue to knock down my psyche, I will always continue to root and cry whenever I see them come up with a big victory. It's just in my nature. And so, again, my major, I guess you could say, criticism when it comes to how the Celtics are discussed is that, oh, this team always chokes when it matters most, which has elements of truth to it, but it severely pisses me off because it ignores all context, within itself. Again, 2017, 2018, they were not supposed to be there. Second year with Kyrie, disappointment. 2020, the bubble year, we just lost to the better team in Miami, where Bam Adebayo turned into prime Hakeem. Then the year later, oh, you need to break up the Jays because they don't complement each other. Well, no one was advocating this when they were still young and developing. Why would we break them up now before they even hit their prime yet? And then, of course, Jaylen Brown, I think he breaks his wrist. We had a bad roster at that point. It was kind of a miracle that the Celtics made the playoffs that year. Excuse me. And then, of course, they get demolished by the KD Kyrie Nets in 5. By the way, that series doesn't get talked about enough because that was the year where I cementedly emerged Jason Tatum as a bona fide superstar. He could go toe-to-toe with a lot of the top superstars in the league, and I saw him do just that against KD, Kyrie, and James Harden. So, yes, Jason Tatum, he is a superstar. If you need to know my clear opinion on him, he's a bona fide superstar. He's a locked top 10 player in the league, fringe top 5. I don't think he's top 5. I think he's in the discussion of it, but I also don't think he's in the best player in the league conversation. So how can a guy be considered overrated where no one thinks he's the best player in the league or even a top 3 player? I'm starting to ramble at this point. And so, again, following year, Danny Ainge steps down, Brad Stevens moves upstairs, and they bring in Emmanuel Udoka. The main reason why this is my favorite era of Celtics basketball is because this is the era where they finally elected, we are going to build around Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown and hope for the best. They trade away Kemba Walker, who they signed in free agency after Kyrie left. They brought back Al Horford. They finally promoted Marcus Smart, into being the lead point guard, the lead ball handler of this team, the main orchestrator. And they just said to themselves, we are going to build around Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown and hope for the best. First couple of months of the season, they were very mediocre, very average. Couldn't close out games to save their lives. Tatum and Brown had not taken that leap in terms of complementing each other's play styles. And again, the rumors about you gotta split Tatum and Brown up were at its highest. Jaylen Brown sends that tweet. We get that crazy ride to end the season, getting all the way up to the number 2 seed. And wow, yes, in the end, the season, while yes, in the finals, it ended quite horribly by watching Tatum struggle that mightily throughout the finals, but it happens. It happens, and I just feel as though people don't, because of how great we've seen, all-time greats like LeBron, Jordan, Bird, and Magic, because we've seen these guys be great out of the gate, people don't realize that generally in your first finals, most of the time you're going to struggle mightily. Again, I mentioned the late great Kobe Bryant averaged 16 points in his first finals, being the second option. Larry Bird had back-to-back 8-point games, and Cedric Maxwell won Finals MVP. LeBron, now granted it was different circumstances, but LeBron was bad in his first 2 finals. He was completely overmatched against the Spurs, and he wet the bed in his second goal in the finals. So I'm not giving Jason Tatum an excuse for underperforming, but it happens, especially when you're a young superstar as the best player. All the focus is going to be on you, and now you have to learn, you have to adjust to the defense around you. Excuse me. And so, we get to the second year. Again, I fully suspected the Celtics to lose in the finals to the Golden State Warriors just because they had been there, they had the experience, their roster was just as good as ours, if I was being honest. And Steph, I thought, not that he had the most to prove to me, but he had the most to prove in general. Oh, can they win a title without Kevin Durant, without everyone's star players getting hurt? Is he going to break through and win that finals MVP and win his first finals MVP, which he should have won in the Warriors' first title? What's life going to be for Steph without KD and for the Warriors in general? Is this the last hurrah for this Warriors team as they go up against this red-hot young Celtics team? And he did, as I suspected. Now, the following year, epic failure. I do not care if you would have lost to Denver. You had no business losing to that Miami Heat team. None. Especially in that fashion. Had it gone back and forth and been a tight series, even though it still would have been an absolute failure, going down 0-3 and losing that badly at home, even with Jason Tatum hobble, I'm sorry. No excuses on this one. Epic failure in mass proportions. But did the Celtics stay packed? Nope. Did the Celtics just say, hey, Tatum and Brown are going to take another lead? Yeah, I'm sure they suspected it, but they made epic changes following that meltdown. And so what do? You take a big swing on Kristaps Porzingis by giving up your heart and soul. I was heartbroken. I was devastated when I got the news that morning that Marcus Smart had got traded to Memphis, of all places. I'm like, listen, Porzingis is a better player. You got back 2 first. But man, as prickly as it would have been, I would have much rather had kept Smart and traded away Malcolm Brogdon. No disrespect to Malcolm Brogdon, but I don't know, man. Marcus had been with the team for so long. He identified the culture of that team, hard work, defensive-minded, but at some point, you just got to deliver in high moments, and I don't know, man. Marcus Smart, I just felt as though his value was not going to be as high as it is now. And if you're going to make a significant upgrade, you're obviously not trading away Tatum and Brown. Your next best asset is probably Marcus Smart. And they moved on. Derek White had proven himself to be, much like Marcus Smart, an elite high-level role player, but a better shot maker. It was time. And then the big one. Thank you, Milwaukee. Thank you oh so much. You guys moving on from Drew Holiday for Dame. I was calling for it. I was hoping it to happen because I want to see how the two of us compete against one another. Completely healthy. But also, get Drew Holiday for Marcus Smart seems like a fair trade-off. Now you have essentially two better versions of Marcus Smart alongside Porzingis, alongside Al Horford, alongside a bench that's decent. The hope is now that the Celtics put it all together. And listen, Dallas, they are a formidable opponent. I am not scared of Dallas. I am petrified of this matchup because this is the best version of Kyrie. Luka is just now hitting his apex. And this team, I felt as though they were underrated after the trade deadline. I thought they were underrated coming into these playoffs. And outside of Denver, if you told me who was the one team that you would be eager to play but just is terrifying, I'd say Dallas. Because I know what Luka is capable of. I definitely know what Kyrie is capable of. And while, yes, the Celtics are uniquely built to match up against a team like Dallas, I don't know, man. Crunch time, game on the line. As much as I love Tatum and Brown, who do I trust more in crunch time? I gotta put my money on Kyrie and Luka. Now, that is not me saying that I'm picking Dallas to win the title. I am not. But what I will say is that Boston, much like the Warriors team, the talent is right there. I think the construction of these rosters are pretty close when you look at the high-end talent of the Mavericks plus the all-around depth of Boston and having two good to solid head coaches. Both are better on the road, ironically, than at home. Both have the Celtics, wow, they have been viewed as a super team throughout the whole year. They're not a super team that everyone believes in and that is fully ready to embrace. Meanwhile, the Dallas Mavericks, while they're by no means a super team, they are a high-end team that everyone has always been ready to pull for and to bet on. And so, I'm excited for this matchup. I'm probably going to break this down in my series tomorrow. But I just wanted to give this breakdown as far as how I became a Celtics fan. What are my overall views of this team, of this tender, of this core? How do I see them? How do I see this team moving forward? And what are my expectations of these finals? And so, again, I am going to try my hardest and damnest to give you guys consistent content because I miss making content on my own anyways, even though I rather do these things alongside my partner. But it's just time for me to put it all on my shoulders and see how it favors. And so, shout out to all you guys. Props to myself for finding the confidence in electing to do this again. And like I said, tomorrow I will be previewing the NBA Finals. And I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace out.